What we uncovered did not just compromise a department, it compromised a coastline. Those were the words spoken behind closed doors at a federal briefing in Washington, D.C., 72 hours before everything became public. 61 officials arrested, 14 precincts locked down, 5 tons of contraband seized from facilities that were supposed to be protecting the public, and at the center of it all, a badge, the most powerful badge in Los Angeles County. $670 million. That is the figure attached to stolen evidence, redirected narcotics, laundered port revenue, and cartel facilitation payments flowing through a network so deeply embedded inside Southern California law enforcement that investigators initially refused to believe what the data was telling them. But the data does not lie. And tonight, we show you exactly how deep it goes. This is the story of Operation Iron Ledger, and the next part is worse than you are ready for. At 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, the Port of Los Angeles sat like a sleeping giant beneath a bruised sky. Sodium lamps cast orange halos over stacked containers the size of houses. Forklifts sat dormant. Security cameras blinked their lazy green rhythms. Everything looked exactly as it should. That was the problem. Everything had been made to look exactly as it should. Federal agents from the FBI, D, ICE, and DAs moved in coordinated silence along the waterfront. 22 strike teams. Over 400 agents, some in tactical black, some in unmarked vehicles, some already embedded inside the facility for 72 consecutive hours. They had been watching the same containers, the same shift supervisors, the same routing manifests that had been quietly altered for nearly 3 years. At 3:51 a.m., the breach signal cracked across encrypted channels. Every team moved simultaneously. The first target was a sealed customs holding facility near Berth 121, officially listed as an overflow evidence storage annex. What agents found inside was not overflow evidence. It was a redistribution hub. 14 reinforced storage cages. Inside, over 2 tons of cocaine packaged in commercial-grade vacuum seal, stamped with what would later be confirmed as Pacific Coast Syndicate markings. Pressed against the far wall, 4 industrial pallets wrapped in gray shrink film. Beneath that film, methamphetamine. Pre-weighed. Pre-packaged. Staged for movement. ICE tactical units hit a second location simultaneously, a bonded logistics warehouse on Terminal Island operating under the name Harborline Distribution LLC. The signage was professional. The business license was current. The night crew of 8 was not expecting company. Agents breached 3 entry points at once. Flashbangs cracked against concrete. Shouting. Running. 2 men bolted for a loading dock with duffel bags. Both were taken down within 40 feet. Inside the bags, cash, banded in rubber, approximately $2.3 million. On top of the cash, a laminated sheet with routing codes, container numbers, and initials. Initials that would not make sense to anyone until the servers came online. Then came the third location, a private bonded evidence locker registered to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Specialized Cargo Division, operating out of a converted cold storage facility in Wilmington. Officially, it held seized contraband pending court disposition. Officially, it had been inspected 6 weeks prior. Officially, everything was in order. Federal agents cut the locks at 4:03 a.m. What they found inside stopped the lead case agent cold for 7 full seconds. His body camera footage would later be sealed for 48 hours pending chain of custody review. Because what was inside that facility was not seized contraband awaiting court disposition. What was inside was an active operating inventory, drugs not tagged for destruction, weapons not logged into evidence, and steel transport cases, 11 of them, each stenciled with official county seals, each containing sealed hard drives, each encrypted. In 6 hours, those hard drives would change everything. By 9:20 a.m., the FBI Cyber Forensics Division in downtown Los Angeles had cracked the first layer of encryption on 3 of the 11 drives. What loaded onto their analysis array was not a simple ledger. It was an architecture. Analysts described it later as looking at a city's electrical grid, except every node on the map was a criminal enterprise, and every current running between them had been deliberately hidden inside official county infrastructure. The operation had a name already assigned internally by its architects, Project Clearwater. Project Clearwater was not a cartel smuggling ring. It was a managed logistics framework. Shell corporations, 47 identified in the first sweep alone, operated as ghost freight brokers, sham import consultancies, and fabricated maritime compliance firms. Their names were unremarkable. Coastal Vantage Partners, Pacific Meridian Solutions, Bayshore Infrastructure Group, each one a hollow vessel, registered in Delaware or Nevada or the Cayman Islands, each one receiving wire transfers from port operators, each one forwarding those transfers through layers of conversion across accounts in Panama, the Way, and Hong Kong, before the money returned to Los Angeles as clean consulting revenue. But the shell companies were not the spine. They were the camouflage. The spine was the Pacific Coast Syndicate, a domestic criminal network that over the course of 7 years had systematically inserted itself into the shipping, storage, and law enforcement infrastructure of Southern California's port corridor. The syndicate was not a traditional cartel. It was not Sinaloa. It was not J&G. It was something more difficult to identify and more dangerous to prosecute, an organization built from the inside, using the architecture of legitimate institutions as its body. And at the top of that architecture sat one name, Sheriff Raymond Voss, Los Angeles County. 14-year law enforcement veteran. 2-term elected official, task force director for the Southern California Port Security Initiative, a federally funded interdiction program designed to stop exactly the kind of narcotics and contraband trafficking that Voss had been facilitating for the past 4 years. The digital signature tied to Voss was not ambiguous. Analysts found his encrypted authorization key embedded in container routing modifications, in falsified evidence transfer orders, in cartel logistics approvals stamped at times when Voss was officially logged as attending law enforcement conferences. His key had been used to override 6 federal alerts. His key had authorized the rerouting of 14 seized narcotics shipments back into syndicate distribution chains. His key had been present at the moment 3 federal cooperatives inside the syndicate went dark and were never seen again. This was not corruption. This was command-level collusion. This was not a sheriff who looked the other way. This was a sheriff who drew the map. What Voss had done, methodically, surgically, over 4 years of building and consolidating, was convert the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's port-adjacent infrastructure into a secure operating environment for the Pacific Coast Syndicate. Evidence lockers became warehouses. Chain of custody became cover. The official machinery of law enforcement became the cartel's best protection against law enforcement. Investigators would later describe it in testimony as follows: the syndicate did not need to bribe its way past the system. The system had been redesigned to function as the syndicate's logistics department, and the operation had just begun, at 5:15 a.m. The following morning, the Joint Federal Command Center established inside a secured facility in El Segundo came fully online. The room held 63 federal coordinators, 17 DEA supervisors, 8 FBI field directors, and a digital operations map projected across a 12-foot display screen. Across that screen, in pulsing red, were 49 active target markers spread across Los Angeles, Long Beach, Compton, Carson, Torrance, and Inland Empire staging zones. The mission was called Phase 2 of Operation Iron Ledger. And it was enormous. Over 1,100 federal agents were deployed across the Southern California grid. 16 SWAT units, 22 DEA Rapid Response Teams, 4 ICE Enforcement Battalions, 2 U.S. Army Logistics Support Detachments providing ground coordination in remote industrial corridors, 3 U.S. Coast Guard cutters repositioned overnight to cover the port channel exits, 2 DACE surveillance aircraft maintaining continuous overhead coverage of primary highway arteries feeding the port complex. The raids hit at 5:44 a.m. across all 49 sites within a 90-second window. In a desert warehouse complex outside Lancaster, DEA agents breached what federal prosecutors would later call one of the most sophisticated narcotics processing facilities ever identified on domestic soil. 3 interconnected industrial units. Inside, a fully operational methamphetamine superlab, capable of processing an estimated 400 kilograms per week, alongside a fentanyl pill press operation running 3 shifts. Agents seized 2.1 million fentanyl pills, 340 kilograms of methamphetamine, and 180 kilograms of heroin. Workers tried to destroy servers with fire extinguisher tanks. They were too slow. In the hills above Palos Verdes, a property registered to a syndicate-linked real estate trust was hit by FBI tactical units. The estate had functioned as a command residence, communications equipment, encrypted satellite uplinks, and a basement-level server room behind a false wall of wine storage. Key syndicate coordinator Marcus Devane, 54, was apprehended at 5:51 a.m. while attempting to flush a mobile phone in a guest bathroom. Near the U.S.-Mexico border in San Diego County, ICE and DIA teams with ground support located a tunnel system running beneath a commercial cold storage facility. The tunnel was 340 feet long, reinforced with concrete, equipped with railcart infrastructure, and ventilated. It had been operational for an estimated 18 months. At the time of the breach, the tunnel contained an active narcotics shipment in transit, approximately 1.8 tons of cocaine in transit packaging. 2 syndicate enforcers guarding the southern access point were taken into custody without shots fired. They had not been told the northern end was already surrounded. In East Los Angeles, ICE agents raided a transit house used as a human trafficking staging facility. 18 individuals were recovered, migrants who had been held under coerced conditions, their movement controlled by syndicate operators as a secondary revenue stream that also served as a logistical smokescreen for narcotics shipments. Federal victim advocates were on site within 30 minutes. Every syndicate operator at that location was arrested. By 11:30 a.m., 41 of the 49 target sites had been secured. Total seizures: 5 tons of narcotics across multiple drug types, $44 million in currency. 340 weapons, including military-grade rifles with serialized numbers matching weapons reported stolen from 2 law enforcement armories, and 17 active syndicate members in federal custody. The underworld had taken more damage in 6 hours than in the last 6 years combined. But the arrests and the seizures were only the surface. What federal investigators found inside the seized servers, the encrypted communication logs, and the internal patrol records would take weeks to fully process, and what it revealed was a second police force. Not a rival gang, not a corrupt unit, a second police force, because that is what the syndicate, under Voss's direction, had built inside the legitimate department. 43 sheriff's deputies, 8 senior patrol supervisors, 2 precinct administrative planners, 1 federal border liaison officer, and 3 sitting members of a county oversight committee had been compromised and were on syndicate payroll. Some received monthly transfers through LLCs tied to syndicate shell infrastructure. Some received cash. Some received information about their own legal vulnerabilities and responded to coercion. Their roles were specific and operational. Border crossing relaxations timed precisely to syndicate convoy schedules, confirmed via cross-referenced GPS data from seized fleet vehicles and official patrol logs. Falsified patrol grid submissions that created 45-minute coverage gaps at designated port access zones during incoming container offloads. Internal leak of a DIA informant's identity in 2023, the informant was subsequently reported missing and has not been found. The honest officers who discovered what their colleagues had been doing described the feeling not as betrayal, but as vertigo. Because you cannot fight corruption when corruption has a badge. When it knows your schedule, when it is sitting 3 desks away and smiling at your daughter's birthday photos on the break room wall. One senior DIA supervisor, speaking off the record, put it plainly: they were not protecting the county. They were protecting the route. Federal agents arrested 11 law enforcement personnel on site during Phase 2 operations. A further 19 were taken into custody in coordinated pre-dawn arrests at private residences across the county. Sheriff Raymond Voss was arrested at his home in Rancho Palos Verdes at 6:02 a.m. He did not resist. He did not speak. His attorney arrived 40 minutes later. By then, the press briefing was already being prepared. Investigators said the badge, and the structure behind it, would be rebuilt from the ground up. That process would take years. And here is what most people will never fully grasp about what was built inside Southern California. It did not stop at the ports. It did not stop at the sheriff's department. Project Clearwater was designed as a continental logistics framework, not a local one. Federal analysts tracking the syndicate's distribution architecture identified active connections to 14 other states. Narcotics processed and packaged inside the Lancaster facility moved north through Oregon and Washington using legitimate agricultural trucking contractors, the kind that pull refrigerated trailers across way stations without triggering secondary screening because their documentation, their carrier histories, their dot compliance records all appeared spotless. They were spotless. They had been made spotless by a compliance auditing firm that was itself a syndicate-controlled shell company operating out of Riverside County. Shipments moving east used a different corridor. Inland Empire warehouse transfers routed through bonded freight carriers with federal port operator credentials that had been fraudulently obtained through a licensing process compromised at the state administrative level. Officials are still identifying how far that corruption extends. The syndicate was, at peak operational capacity, capable of moving an estimated 8 to 12 tons of narcotics per month through Southern California without triggering a single automated alert in the federal cargo monitoring system. 8 to 12 tons. Every month. The system did not miss it by accident. The system had been modified to miss it and buried deepest in the encrypted Project Clearwater files, in a directory that required 4 separate decryption keys, 2 of which came from Voss's authorization suite. Agents found what federal prosecutors would describe in their preliminary filings as Phase 3. Phase 3 was not a smuggling plan. Phase 3 was a consolidation plan, a 10-year framework for using the legitimized infrastructure. The shell corporations, the compromised enforcement apparatus, the controlled port corridors, to cement the Pacific Coast Syndicate's operational control over Southern California's logistics economy so completely and so legally that no future administration, no future federal pressure, and no future investigation could untangle it without effectively dismantling the regional shipping and commerce infrastructure that millions of ordinary people depend on every single day. They were not building a drug empire. They were building a permanent architecture inside the empire you already live in. That is the realization that chills the agents who have read the full filing. The system was not infiltrated for profit. It was being redesigned for permanence. For a future where the cartel did not need to hide. Where the cartel was, in every functional sense, the institution. Here is what that looks like in human terms. The fentanyl that moved through those seized containers did not disappear into the economy cleanly. It disappeared into neighborhoods, into apartments in Watts and Compton and East Los Angeles, into the hands of teenagers in the San Fernando Valley, into the veins of fathers in Lancaster who are now statistics in a coroner's report. Families broken by addiction that was engineered, packaged, and distributed by a network operating behind a county seal and a sheriff's badge. The cocaine, the heroin, the methamphetamine, the 2.1 million fentanyl pills seized in a single night, those were not the whole supply. They were one shipment's worth. And for every ton seized, investigators estimate several more had already been absorbed into the distribution chain in the months prior. Power does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it announces itself with paperwork. With official seals, with a well-pressed uniform and a firm handshake at a county budget meeting. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a criminal network can acquire is not a weapon. It is legitimacy. And Raymond Voss sold them legitimacy by the ton. This story is a warning. Not just about one corrupt sheriff, not just about one port city. It is a warning about what organized crime becomes when it stops trying to hide from institutions and starts trying to become them. When it stops bribing officials and starts running for office. When the badge itself becomes the weapon. Operation Iron Ledger is ongoing. Federal prosecutors confirm additional indictments are expected. The investigation has expanded to at least 3 other counties. Several elected officials have been contacted for voluntary cooperation. At least 2 have retained criminal defense attorneys. If you are still watching this, tap like so that more people see this story, because the moment it fades from public attention is the moment the rebuilding stops and the rot starts again. Comment expose if you want this corruption dragged into the light and kept there. The badge is supposed to be the line. When the badge becomes the crime, the line disappears entirely, and someone has to draw it again.